Hi, this is a very fast description of how the process and the tools that I'm using to sort of manufacture a piece of silver jewelry with my CNC milling machine. So let's get into it. I start with a design. I would like to note that I found this on Etsy, this pendant design. I would have been delighted to buy this from the artist. However, she's not making them anymore and they're sold out. So I'm going to start with the photograph, and then step one, eliminate the background. Then step two, sort of break it into separate pieces. I did all this using the GIMP, the GNU image manipulation program, a piece of open source software that is not dissimilar from Adobe Photoshop in that it is a photo editor. Once I've got those pieces isolated, then I brought those files into Inkscape, a piece of open source software that is not dissimilar from Adobe Illustrator. That lets me take those photographs, trace them into paths that are a mathematical representation of a shape, manipulate those. So I edited them so that the smallest features were at least the size of the cutting bit that I'm going to use on my machine, which in this particular case is 0.7 millimeters. So I can't cut anything smaller than that. And then lay them out on a drawing surface which is 50 by 50 millimeters, because that's the size of the shape of the piece of silver that I purchased. So once all that's done, I'm going to bring it into the next tool, which I need to take that SVG file, that scalable vector graphics file that represents the artwork, but I need to turn that into instructions for the machine. So I need a piece of computer-aided manufacturing software. I'm using CrabsCam, written by Marius Krabset. I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. I apologize. I think he's German. One of the neat things is that about this fact that it's open source software is that I suggested several different features to Marius, and he just implemented them the next day. And I could have probably gone and written them to myself, but for example, being able to select paths in the artwork by color, something that it didn't have. I asked for it. He added that feature. So in here, I specify all the different sort of numerical parameters, like how big is my cutting tool, how fast do I want it to turn, how fast do I want it to move, how thick is the workpiece, all those kinds of things, how depth of each cut. And once all those things are done, I can sort of click Generate Toolpath. I'm doing a profile operation where I want it to cut outside of each of the different elements of this path. And then I can sort of save those as a file, which I can then bring into the next tool, a piece of open source software called CNC JS. This is the software that I use to actually control the physical machine. It does two things for me. It sends those instructions, which are then interpreted by the machine. The machine runs a piece of open source software called Gerbl, GRBL. That's the actual firmware of the device that generates the actual electrical pulses to control the motor. But it does that from the instructions that are sent to it by CNC JS. So I can here use these sort of buttons to drive this virtual cutting head around relative to the toolpath that it has plotted in 3 dimensions. But it's also sending those instructions to the real world machine that's sitting on my desk. And I can use that to sort of zero out the machine and specify where the cutting bit is relative to where I've clamped the workpiece to the machine itself. Once I'm happy with all of that, I can sort of do that with these little buttons here about zero out work offsets. I click the play button and it will start cutting. Now I've actually, as I'm recording this, already cut this piece, but here's what it looked like when it was cutting. This is the actual piece of silver clamped to the machine, and the machine actually cutting out the head of the critter that was part of the artwork here. In the foreground you can see the bodies that I've already cut out. So that's the gist of what it looks like to do this. Now, as it's very delicate, I actually broke several of the bits on the machine because they're 0.7 millimeters and that's very small. I also ruined the workpiece. Here's the sort of example of a previous prototype that I cut out of aluminum. It's much easier to cut aluminum than it is silver. Aluminum is just relatively soft. I will solder that together. I'm going to order another piece and I'll cut the thing again and solder this thing up. But that's the feel for sort of how the process works and what it looks like. Hope this has been interesting to you, and don't do anything I wouldn't enjoy.